and Statistics for the year, and I am delighted to welcome you to our webinar about the Common Education Data Standards, which we commonly refer to as CEDS. Dwayne Brown and Emily Rang from the CEDS team will be providing an overview of CEDS and its uses by both SEAs and LEAs, and we are so excited to hear what they have to say. As you may know, CEDS is an education data management initiative whose purpose is to streamline the understanding of data within and across early learning, elementary, secondary, post-secondary, and workforce, or P20W, institutions and sectors. CEDS includes a common vocabulary for data, data models that reflect that vocabulary, tools to help education stakeholders understand and use the data, an assembly of metadata from other education data initiatives, and a community of education stakeholders who discuss the uses of CEDS and the development of the standard. Dwayne and Emily, thank you so much for sharing this important information with the forum, and I am happy to turn it over to you so we can learn more about CEDS.
My goodness. Well, thank you for such a warm welcome, Georgia, and thank you to everyone at the forum for inviting us to come today. As you can see on the screen here, we've got kind of just a quick activity for you all to take a moment and enter into the chat, if you would please. And number 1 through 5 there, kind of where you're at the moment about CEDS in terms of your personal knowledge. No answer is the wrong answer here, which is always good. Just trying to get a sense of kind of where folks start, and hopefully we can provide some information that sets everybody at somewhat of a similar base level and help you further some understanding about the Common Education Data Standards. And Georgia, I very much appreciate your 3.5, especially being in a forum where, you know, data values matter, and exactness is important. So that's really fun. Wonderful. Thank you. Wonderful. So just as I glanced through the chat, I could see, I mean, wide ranges of exposure, knowledge. You know, some of you may be newer to the education data space, newer to the forum. And our goal today is really just to help give you some base information about the standards and be able to address any questions you might have. So thank you all very much for participating in our fun. So as Georgia mentioned, you have myself, Emily Rang. I am the CEDS coordinator. So I formerly from the state of Washington. I used to work for the State Office of Education there for the past almost 13 and a half years as a data governance coordinator and EdFacts coordinator. And then 2 years ago, moved over to AEM, and part of my role is supporting CEDS. With me today is also Dwayne Brown, also known as the CEDS expert, and he is our CEDS open source community lead. So his face and name should be fairly familiar to you all if you've had the opportunity to join any of the open source community meetings or other presentations. So Dwayne, if you want to say hi to everyone.
Hello, it's great to be here. Very familiar with a lot of things the forum has done, a lot of contributions to CEDS over time from the forum. Prior to working on CEDS, I was with the Oklahoma State Department of Education. So spent about 8.5 years there working on their student information system, gathering the data from states for report or from LEAs for reporting. So very much familiar with the work that SEAs do and working with LEAs in collecting that data.
Thanks, Dwayne. So as we mentioned, we're super excited to be here today. We're going to get right into it so that we have lots of time for you all to have address any questions and make sure we can get through all of our content and show you around CEDS. So you may or may not know, but CEDS has really a long history with the forum. For example, CEDS is actually a descendant of the NCES handbooks. The forum developed those handbooks in the later years, and when CEDS was created, it came from handbook elements, right? That was part of the start of CEDS. And eventually, CEDS incorporated all of the work of the NCES handbooks, and any handbook elements that weren't brought over directly into CEDS still exist in a section of CEDS called CEDS Extend, which we won't really touch on too much today, but I'll certainly answer any questions you have about that section. And of course, as you all develop guides and whenever there's education data elements in there, CEDS looks to the forum for us to be able to include those elements that you all reference in your guides. It's also an opportunity, CEDS can be a resource for you all to look to CEDS to see if there's something out there that might be helpful in your quest to find information to put into the guides. So we'll go through that and we'll look at some of the tools that might be helpful for you all, as well as give you kind of an overall view of the place. So let's dive right into it. We're going to start with the most exciting thing. So hope you all are prepared. We have a quiz right off the bat. So pens and paper out. Here we go. Just kidding. I'll turn it over to Dwayne for a fun quiz.
So essentially the quiz is the whole point, as was mentioned earlier about CEDS, is the vocabulary and trying to streamline understanding across all of the different domains, K-12, post-secondary, early childhood, whatever it is, and speaking the same language. So if you've seen this quiz before, no cheating, but if you haven't seen the quiz before, great. Then in the chat, what we're going to show you is a series starting with this first one of these all are going to mean the same thing. These are codes or indicators that come from an aligned map or from several different aligned maps inside of CEDS where they say this means this in CEDS. And so they did the mapping, but I want you to take a look at the code, and what we have currently up there is WSU15. Now, if you are from WSU or wherever that's at, Washington State University, I don't know where that is actually. I have no idea, but it's in an aligned map. And they said this represents a particular element within CEDS. If you have any idea what element we are representing within CEDS with that, you can go ahead and type in the chat, see if you guessed correctly. Again, if you've taken the quiz before, no cheating, because you may already know what it represents. But most of the time we look at this, we're like, we have no idea what this is. And that's the state of data in a lot of places. Like, I have no idea. Unless it's documented well, unless it's been aligned to something with a definition, you have no idea what it is. So go ahead and click to the next one. Okay, same thing. WSU 15 and KELPA mean the same thing. Two different state agencies or LEAs or organizations. One could be university, one could be a SEA, just various different. All right, we got one guess here for limited English proficiency. We got ELP. Go ahead and go to the next one. Means the same thing. SLEP1. Go ahead to the next one. ESL. And go ahead to the next one. ELL, I think it's going to be easier. And we do have a winner from, West Virginia Department of Education. Is KELPA your code? I don't know. I will see. Then go ahead to the next one. I think we have one more. I think we have one more after that then. Right. Okay. So LEP indicator, limited English proficient, English language learner, English as a second language, English learner now, all very similar things, different terminology being used, but all aligned to the CEDS element English learner within CEDS. So that kind of just gives you, WS is our old code, very old. Now we've replaced it. That's kind of cheating, but that's okay. That's all right. That's awesome. So yeah, these all had that same meaning. And so what CEDS just attempts to do is we're all speaking the same vocabulary. And that's what this quiz is to kind of give an example of. We all called it English learner. We knew what the definition was, and we could have communication between data, between systems, between each other. So just a fun quiz to start off. That's awesome.
I think we're going to have to send Georgia some cookies, virtual cookies for that prize. I love that we used one of your codes too.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah.
So how do we get to that common vocabulary? What do we have to do? Well, CEDS has some tools. So the very first CEDS tool we're going to talk about, or component, if you will, are the ones that probably come to most of our minds when we think about that common vocabulary. the CEDS elements. So there's over 1,700 elements, as Georgia kind of mentioned, that span from preschool to workforce and cover everything from students to staff to parents to well, there are some implementation variables in there as well, which Dwayne will kind of more useful as we get to Dwayne's section on some of the physical implementations of CEDS. But one of the key things about the CEDS elements is that they go down to the most base level. So the intent is that CEDS would capture, the school or program level elements that might not necessarily be what you all think of if you're at an SEA. Might be data that is collected at your LEAs, or if you're an LEA, might even be data that you don't necessarily collect, but that is housed in your school system, or in some cases even down to like the program level, right? So especially if we start thinking about like early learning and those partner organizations. So really CEDS as the base level of element, so that we can then take those base pieces of information and that vocabulary, and when we want to do more with it, we can aggregate or combine elements in order to answer those additional questions. And we'll talk more about that in a moment as well. But the intent is really something to think about. Is just the intent is that it's at the most base level. So let's go look at the elements here. We're going to go out to the website. There we go. So this is what the Common Education Data Standards website looks like. We are landing here on cedsed.gov, and we're going to go right out to, we're actually going to go leverage one of the, I think the easiest ways to look at the elements, which is over here in our domain entity schema.
Does everyone see that? I don't see it, so I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, give me a second. I'm not sure. Can practice. There we go. How about try that now? Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry about that. All right, so we're here on the CEDS main webpage, and we're going to leverage what I think is the easiest way to take a look at the elements, which is under this data model tab. And we're going to go to the domain entity schema. Okay, so don't be intimidated by this word if you are new to CEDS. This is just a way to group these elements or vocabulary pieces together in a way that makes it easier for us to navigate around and look at them. Another thing to note, you do not need to have a username or password or any kind of login to access all of the information we're going to look at today. So again, we're here at kind of this grouping, right? So each of these file folders represents a grouping of CEDS elements. And for us today, we're going to focus on K-12. So I'm going to click this open. And then we're going to go down here and actually look at K-12 course information. And there's a reason for this, because you may not know this, but there are some really critical elements in here related to the SCED codes, which you all manage and maintain, right? So the school courses for the exchange of data. So if we take a look at this element, school courses for the exchange of data, the course level, you can see that in this element detail, we have the name of the element here at the top. We have an alternate name, so referencing the acronym SCED course level, the definition of this particular element, and then this element has an option set. So there are specific options that are available to use when reporting data about this element. These should look familiar to you all if you have leveraged the SCED codes recently. And so this information here tells us what possible values are a part of this element, what you could select for reporting the school courses for the exchange of data course level, and these are the options. A couple of other pieces of information that also might not look familiar to you, but there are related areas that you might be interested in looking at to, again, you can go into the career and technical, there's a course element there, and there's a K-12 student graduation plan. We also use this course level there. CEDS assigns a unique element ID to all of our elements, so that's represented here. And one thing that I like to point out whenever I do these introductory kind of overviews of CEDS, you'll notice when you land on this pop-up box here, your URL to this web address is not specific. If you wanted to send this specific element or to somebody in an email or link it in some way, you want to use this link down below to get directly to it. You can also email it to yourself. So just as a little tip for leveraging any of the elements in here as you're potentially wanting to, sort of create a link or save something to come back to. See. So now I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint. Yeah. All right. Hopefully you all are seeing the, whoop. There we go. That should be back up. Sharing the PowerPoint again. Excellent. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the CEDS Align tool. So we talked a little bit about the elements, right? Those are the base pieces of our vocabulary. Align is essentially your translation. Align allows you to take unique elements in your own systems or in a system that you use and be able to align, that's the verb, or map essentially your data elements from a data dictionary into the CEDS data elements. So the element names, definitions, and option sets can all be uploaded into the CEDS Align tool from your source data dictionary. And it creates a map that allows you can use it for different reports. You can then combine things and see where maybe you have something in a system that doesn't exist in CEDS. That might be interesting. Or where other differences or similarities exist between your data dictionary and the elements you have from whatever your particular system is, and CEDS. The Align tool is kind of an interesting one because you can also leverage this tool for creating essentially your own online visible data dictionary. So I mentioned that you can upload your own information about your own source and how that aligns to CEDS. You can make that Align map publicly available for others to find. And it's a way that you might be able to leverage in terms of sharing that information with interested stakeholders without having to publish something on your website or keep a Word or PDF document up to date. You can go directly in through the tool and actually make the changes to that data dictionary directly within the Align tool. So we're going to go out to the CEDS website. Second, I have to get somewhere. To close out of our elements here, we're going to go back up to tools now. So we were in data model. Now we're going to go to tools. We're going to go to the Align tool. So again, don't need to be logged in to do any of this. So now we're actually going to go look at kind of an interesting report, mostly because I think that this is something that you all have used in the past with the forum to sort of see again, across all of those publicly available Align maps, who is leveraging these elements, or how could I understand what somebody else is using with a particular element? Could be informational for you all as you're thinking about different guides or what's happening out in the field outside of just members of the forum. So we're going to go to K-12. So this should look familiar, right? This is the same sort of organization that we had earlier. And I want to look specifically, we're going to go down here to K-12 staff. Oops, and I don't want everything. That credential or license. So we're going to go see who is leveraging credential or license and we're going to look for the credential type. So who's using this credential type element in their alignment? So it's telling us that this is what we've searched for. And so now I'm going to look at this. Oh, wow. So if we look through this report, we can see all of these different organizations here have used or aligned essentially an element to this particular credential type element in CEDS. So there are all of these shared align maps out there that refer to this element. So we've got several state organizations. Looks like a couple are across different domains. So not just in the K-12 domain, but they have this credential type K-12 data. That's kind of interesting. Definitely some specific systems and that also have mapped to this. So that's kind of interesting. Just kind of gives you an idea of how other organizations are have said that they either do or have an element that's similar or the same as the CEDS element. So just provide some information. So it's a little bit of a different way to think about using an align map that might be beneficial to the forum and certainly has been leveraged in the past. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about the CEDS Connect tool. So we've talked about the base elements, talked about the alignment. Now we're going to talk about Connect. I think of Connect as a tool that is your business rules or your business rules documentation. Connect is a way for stakeholders across this P20W spectrum to either address or define and calculate metrics, indicators, or create documentation for like a whole report. It allows you to sort of analyze what data or data elements are needed in order to produce that metric or report. And it also has it's the place that we often talk about in terms of like when you have a research question. And so you can use Connect to essentially define what elements you think you would need in order to be able to answer your research question. So this is essentially a free online tool that allows you to define those metrics or those requirements, and it also has a library of there's more than 500 publicly available connections. There's probably way more than that now. And so you can go and see what people have been leveraging for creating their metrics or also for reporting. I'm gonna pop out there for a second. It's easy to go one way, hard to go the other way for some reason. There we go. Okay, so here on our CEDS page, we're going to go back to tools. You'll see Connect is right below. To connect. And we're going to actually find some existing connections. And this may be familiar to a few of you. I see some familiar names on here. Those of you who might be involved in either any EdFacts reporting or leveraging the Generate tool. So I selected here from the left some filters in order to sort of narrow down our options here. So I selected EdFacts, and you can see that there are several connections in here that are associated with how to create the EdFacts file specs for reporting to the federal government by SEAs. So this is just one example, but you can see that we've got the directory file for those of you who are familiar with that particular report, which already has a set of requirements, but this particular connection allows folks to be able to see exactly which CEDS elements are needed and how to aggregate those in order to create that reporting. So if we click on these. It just provides some information here. So there's some descriptors that help us navigate around. And we have the important parts, as I would say, down here in the bottom. We can see all of the CEDS elements that are needed in order to produce this report. There's a lot. This is directory. It's the basis of all the information that comes from the SEAs. There's also some information about selection criteria and mapping. So these are specific to that EDFACS reporting, and any related connections and related references are included on here as well. So you can see SID with the work in Generate, which we'll talk about, is related to some of this work. So again, I think the interesting piece is looking at all of the CEDS elements and being able to read through that analysis recommendation in terms of how things are aggregated. This one doesn't have as much aggregation necessarily because a lot of these elements align pretty closely with what's required for that directory reporting. Just kind of get the idea. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Dwayne to talk about the CEDS Integrated Data Store.
All right, great. So I think I've taken over the sharing. And so the CEDS Integrated Data Store, we're going to get a little more technical now. We have the elements, we have the align tool where how you can map between your elements, and then the connect tool where you can start to ask questions about your elements. We're going to start looking actually at physical data models that CEDS has available open source for anyone to make use of. So the first one is the CEDS Integrated Data Store. It is actually a third normal form database structure. It contains every element that exists within CEDS. So if you go to the CEDS website and you find any element in there, you find any option set in there, any option set code, you're going to find that stored somewhere or some place to store the data within the normalized data schema, integrated data store. So this model is used for mainly for like transactional or integrating data together. It's not necessarily used for answering questions as you would use the data warehouse, which we'll talk about in a section. But if you want to bring data in, if you want to collect data, such as your directory management systems for an SEA, or if you even think of like a student information system, the way a student information system functions is it's actually like it's a normalized model for being able to do transactional things, update a student's name, update their address, not built necessarily for doing aggregations or statistical reporting, but built to collect data. So the CEDS Integrated Data Store is that particular model. If we take a look, just so you can kind of get a glance at what it actually looks like. So version 10, there'll be version 11 coming out here in February, has over 700 tables inside of it. You can see tables related to assessments, tables related to competencies, courses, course sections. We get into more specific things related to early childhood, facilities. So LEAs have numerous facilities, all of the information related to a facility. It's mortgage information, the relationship between the facilities, financial information, energy, etc. There's elements inside of CEDS in relation to that. I didn't know this, but there was an element related to building cleaning levels. Like, really? This room's been cleaned to this level. Okay, I learned things. I've been with it for years and years and years, and I still like, we have that in CEDS? That's amazing. I didn't know we had. Is anyone using that? That's great. So K-12, we have information there related in an organization, and then we finally, make our way down. These are all the reference tables. And so inside of here, we have all of the different option sets and codes that are standardized within CEDS. So let me mention we have 1,700 unique elements. If you take a look at the option sets within CEDS, which are unique in and of themselves, there's over 24,000 possible combinations that exist as far as unique meaning in something. So what I wanted to do is take a look back here at the CEDS website, and trending on that theme of the SCED codes, kind of show you how it would work for somebody using the IDS to make it a little easier. So this is a different way to come to the elements. She went through the domain entity schema, which has the model for you to search for. You're not sure what you're looking for, but if you know kind of what you're looking for, you can go to elements and then you can just type in a search. So in this particular instance, I'm going to look for SCED. in the hopes that we have the abbreviation somewhere in there. And so what it's searching through is the name, the definitions, and the option sets. So if anywhere in any of those SCED appears, it's going to give that to me. If I uncheck definitions and option set, I wouldn't end up with it because it's going to appear in the definition of the option set. So if we take a look at that one, she had brought up before, the exchange of data course level, and we expand out into this, we're going to see that ID she mentioned, which is very important to people using the CDS other resources, such as the integrated data store. So 001516, we know that's the SCED course level, but if I was over here inside of this and trying to navigate, that's got to be inside one of these tables somewhere, right? Yeah. But the convenient thing is we can just do this and run a query, and we know that it's going to be found inside of K-12 course. It can be found inside of CTE course, and then it also has its own reference table where those actual literal codes are listed. So if I was doing, okay, well, let me go find K-12 course, and then I scroll up and find K-12 course and expand out. Here's the SCED course code. Here is the, where is it? The ref SCED course level should be in here. Here's the course level ID, the subject area. So all of that information is available for them to load data. So if they were going to want to collect the SCED course codes in alignment with the K-12 courses that they're building, and they want to know this particular K-12 course aligns to that SCED code, they have a place where they could then store the course and then indicate the exact SCED course code and level that they would be applying to that particular course. So that number is tagged everywhere within the IDS and also within the warehouse to let them find that. So again, the purpose of this is really from a collection standpoint, where I can bring all the data together from lots of different sources and integrate it into one location that I can then begin to utilize that data for other means. The next thing we're going to take a look at is the CDS data warehouse. Again, also, it's a it actually comes in two forms now. It used to only come in one form, which was the SQL database. So Microsoft SQL is what the integrated data store is. The data warehouse is also Microsoft SQL database structure. And if we take a look at that one, it's going to be similar, except it's modeled differently. Scroll up to here. The data warehouse has tables also, but it primarily is made up of dimensions and fact tables. So they start with like dim or they start with fact. And what this is a way to actually start to do analysis on the data. So you are able to ask questions about how many students XYZ, whatever that question is. And so with inside of these tables, you have the ability to do reporting. So if you wanted to do a school report card, or if you wanted to do EdFacts reporting, or you wanted to do CRD receipt reporting, or any other kind of reporting that you want to do, you would take and make use of this because it's actually going to give you counts. It's designed under the Kimball star schema pattern, which is a method for designing warehouses, and the whole point is to be fast, right? It's not a collection mechanism like the IDS is. It's a place where you put a lot of data and you repeat a lot of it a lot of times to be able to answer questions quickly and get data out of it quickly. So if we were to take a look in here, kind of on that same thing with the SCED codes, here they are in this particular dimension table. So every possible combination of SCED codes along with levels and descriptions and titles would exist inside of this dimension table. And then if they wanted to utilize that, then they would in a fact table. So we have student course sections, and here's the SCED code ID. So that's going to take them over to that dimension table. So there's a particular LEA or SEA or K-12 school with a student who has a particular demographic. Here's a course that they are enrolled in. And then here would be the SCED code that would be associated with that particular course section that the student was enrolled in. This is a table actually that Michigan added in building out the data warehouse. So the contributions for the data warehouse and everything comes from stakeholders. But that is essentially what the data warehouse is a dimensional model for being able to pull data out. I mentioned it's SQL. We also have a Parquet version of that. And every time I hear Parquet, I just want to say butter. But it's not the same thing. It's spelled differently. But we do have a Parquet version, which is more cloud native. So it's stored a little bit differently, which is funny you go from flat files to database structures like this, and now we're back to flat files again. But Parquet is a columnar flat file storage mechanism that's more cloud native, and it's an open source structure that can be used across AWS or Google or Azure, any environment that you want to utilize that in, so that you don't necessarily have to use Microsoft SQL Server. So we were actually building other resources as well to not make you stuck with SQL Server. So Parquet can be used across any of the platforms. Same data warehouse structure and models and all of the things inside of that are there, but it's a different methodology for actually storing that data and being able to pull that up. Then the next one is the CEDS ontology. This one is a baby, very, very infant, just starting off. We actually kicked off, I think it was in May. I could be totally wrong about that, but I think it was May of this year, where we kicked off. Mississippi, South Carolina, and Michigan all put a request in. Mississippi started the request, South Carolina wanted it also, and Michigan also then chimed in that they also need this. And so we started a work group that meets every other week to build an ontology for CEDS. And essentially what this is every element within CEDS connected together in some kind of triple format. If you're familiar with triples, great. If you're not, it's kind of what the World Wide Web semantic layer is built on. Is that I gave Emily the example because she has horses. Emily has a horse, so that's the triple. Emily owns a horse, and then that horse has a name, right? And so we're taking all of the CEDS elements and building the ontology, which requires us then not only to define the elements, but to define the relationship as well. So that's something, we have some relationships defined, but we don't have them all. So if I was to say the student is enrolled in the school, we know student, we have names about student defined, we have schools defined, we have elements about the schools defined, but enrolled, what do we mean by enrolled? What do I mean by has a name, right? What do I mean by that? And so we're going through and actually developing out those kind of things so that that relationship in between actually is known. And the purpose of this ontology is it really can be expressed in lots of different ways. So we have the CEDS Parquet for the warehouse, which is open source, an open source version of being able to utilize it in a lot of platforms. The ontology will be able to be expressed in RDF, JSON, XML, any other type of format that you would need then to utilize for the transmission of data or the storage of data. Mississippi intends to pull the data in JSON and store it just like that. They won't use the CEDS integrated data store. They will actually store it in a JSON format based off of the ontology from CEDS, and then from there into Parquet. So they'll have that ability to use cloud native resources for that. Michigan intends to use the JSON for moving data actually into the CEDS integrated data store from based off of like position data. So teachers and that sort of thing, and trying to figure out what job openings exist, what kind of gap is there with teachers. And that's some of the work that they're looking at doing with the CEDS integrated data store, but want to be able to use microservices to move data around, and they need the JSON for that. So that's the CEDS ontology there. Not much to show about that. We do have a private repository that we're building in, and all of those who are developing and helping with that have access to that. Anyone can have access to it at any time if they want to come in and be able to download some of those files. So nothing to show aside from that picture right there, but that's what we're working on. We hope to have releases of that by May of next year and make that available. So I'm going to turn it back over to Emily. I'll keep the screen share, but I'll let you start talking about the Generate tool.
Great, thanks, Dwayne. So Generate is a tool you might have heard of. It's probably most pertinent to state education agencies, but I think it's really beneficial for others in case your state education agency is leveraging Generate. If you're an LEA or you're at a different level, it's interesting to know. So just quickly, we're going to Generate a software application that was developed by the Center for the Integration of IDEA data. So it's very focused on students with disabilities to help improve data quality, and helps automate data reporting for state education agencies through the use of basically a CEDS underpinning, right? So CEDS, the data warehouse itself, is the the pieces below the actual application that allow for this automated standardized reporting process. So Generate was built on the CEDS data warehouse, like I said, and it's also being actively implemented in 20 state organizations across the country. So a little picture on that. The benefit, again, of Generate is that essentially it's being used as a translator, right? So taking information about students with disabilities and maybe other data across the state education agency and knowledgeably communicate between those two things using CEDS, and then Generate as a tool that sits on top of that data warehouse in order to create the EdFacts files for reporting to the Office of Special Education. So again, I mentioned that there are 20 states currently in some form of either have implemented or are implementing now. You can kind of just sort of see what that looks like here. It's also, we've got states that have committed through their SLDS grants that they are going to implement an SLDS leveraging the CEDS physical data model. So either the integrated data store or the data warehouse. And so more states are having those kinds of conversations on how to leverage those tools that Dwayne was just talking about in terms of the physical implementations of CEDS. And then I also, on this map, we also have some states and territories with shared CEDS align maps. Tried to just kind of put that on the picture as well. Just kind of give you a sense of where in states, anyway, states and territories are using and leveraging CEDS. Back to you, Dwayne.
One more thing I want to mention on this one is anywhere you see the Generate logo, effectively they have the CEDS data warehouse as well. I think she mentioned that, but that's like, in my mind, kind of remarkable that all of these states contain the CEDS data warehouse, the exact same data warehouse with the same columns, the same names. It's all identical. So right now it's for EdFacts reporting, but if any one of these states was to build something else to be able to read data from their warehouse, if Nevada built a school report card and you come over here and Mississippi or Michigan wanted to use that school report card, they could use it. It would fit right on top of their data warehouse. So all kinds of cool things about having the same structured model in that same location. So taking a look at the big picture. So just trying to put all this together. So how does this work? So the first thing we're going to take is the elements. We have elements. Sched codes, because you guys are familiar with those. We have Sched codes. That's great. But what do we do what do we do with that? What happens now that we have elements? Well, you can build data dictionaries. You can use the CEDS element, names and element definitions inside of your own systems or publicly transparency to say, this is what it means when we say this. So you can steal the definitions. They're open source and free to use. So you don't have to go define all of your own elements. You would have to do some aligning. So here's our element and here's the CEDS element. And so we know we have the same meaning. So align comes in to say, I have these elements. CEDS has these elements. Now we know the meaning is the same. From there, you could take the integrated data store and you could actually store your data in a CEDS format. And that's where the integrated data store comes in. I have these elements. They align to these CEDS elements. You know what? I want to load my data into a particular location, such as the integrated data store. And now I'm converting my data over to actually being not customized or proprietary data structure. It's actually going to be sitting in an open source structure, and it's going to be natively CEDS through that process. So that's something that you could do. Data warehouse is, now that I have this integrated data, I want to be able to answer questions about that data. I want to be able to do research. I want to be able to do reporting. I want to be able to get aggregates. I want to be able to build school report cards. I want to be able to do EdFacts or CRDC or whatever the case is. I want to be able to do these type of reports out of a warehouse. And so same elements, different data structure that exists within inside of that particular warehouse. Also, then you have the Parquet version of the warehouse. How does all of this communicate with each other? That's where the CEDS ontology comes in. As the CEDS ontology is completed, it will actually take over some of that domain entity schema structure Align will be built then on the CEDS ontology in the future, not on just the DES structure. The ability to move data from the integrated store to the warehouse to Parquet, or just store it in JSON format. The ontology would actually end up wrapping the entire structure of CEDS and be able to communicate. So source systems then, the way that they would be able to communicate with CEDS or to transform into CEDS would be through the ontology. So some of the work that we're looking at with EdFi, for instance, we've had conversations with them. Some of the needs they have is to be able to move data out of EdFi and into a CEDS environment. That's going to be through that ontology, kind of that gate to be able to bring the data inside of that location. Finally, we get to the connect tool. The connect tool is essentially how you ask your questions. Why do we do all this in the first place? Why do we have databases? Why do we collect data? Ultimately, because we have questions we need to answer, whether they're for compliance reporting or whether they're for improving instruction and outcomes for students. Regardless, we have questions we need to answer. And the connect tool brings that together and says, okay, here are the elements we need. Here's the question we're going to ask. Here's how we would put those elements together to be able to answer that question. And so the connect tool then lets you point to the ontology, to the integrated data, to the warehouse, wherever those elements are stored, to be able to get the answers to the questions that you need. It helps you build that base for the questions. Some of the things we're working on in the future is Connect actually producing reports that will let you know exactly where within the various different databases those elements are stored once you build the connection. So that's kind of looking at how all of this comes together. The Generate tool is just one resource that actually utilizes that environment to be able to build, to be able to do EdFacts reporting, right? That's its basic point. I'm going to utilize the CEDS environment since I know it. I can see it. I know exactly what it is. I can go ahead and use that to do EdFacts reporting. In the future, we expect other resources to be built. As I mentioned, Michigan's working on something related to looking at positions that schools have for teachers and bus drivers and whatever, and the gap between what's available and what's actually being filled. And there'll probably be some new things that will come into CEDS as a result of that as they look at positions, something that's kind of new. We have teaching assignment, but we don't necessarily have positions. And then you have South Carolina's doing some work in relation to, oh, I should mention from the SCED code alignment thing, Michigan is looking at it, but they're looking at it from a SCED code. So they want to have this positions available, but what SCED code does it represent for what is being offered? So it's a math teacher, it's a reading teacher, whatever it is in relation to a SCED code, they're going to bring that in and utilize that. South Carolina is working on some things in relation to with IMS and looking at learning resources and wanting to utilize the SCED codes and have those be kind of more publicly and prominently available from CEDS. They need them to be machine readable in a case format from an IMS perspective to be able to utilize those codes to be able to do learning resources across states. And then Mississippi is going to be utilizing the JSON and actually collecting the course information, utilizing SCED as a standard for how they would collect the course level information. So all kinds of things happening within that environment. And that's sort of the big picture of how it all works together. All those resources exist. So who creates the resources? Essentially you do. All of you are stakeholders. I know some of you on the call are actually creating resources outside the forum, and then some of you are creating resources within the forum. We don't really create anything in the CEDS environment, unless it's been asked for. And so through the open source community, you can see 4 tickets in there, 3 related to SCED updates. The SCED update to V10, we have pending community approval right now. It's slated December, the beginning of December, to actually be approved. It will be, I'm sure, but that will be updating the version within CEDS to SCED version 10. We also have the form and comments on exit or withdrawal type, where you guys went through and you updated the exit and withdrawal codes. I had some conversations with some of you in relation to that, and then that was added to CEDS version 9. So tickets are opened, or we really don't do any work. So like I mentioned before, Mississippi open tickets, Michigan's open tickets, North Carolina's open tickets, South Carolina's open tickets. We've had vendors opening tickets where they're looking at implementations and utilizing those resources, and there's different things that they need added to CEDS. And you can see our schedule there in November. That's where we're meeting, a lot of meetings to discuss a variety of different things where stakeholders are involved in discussing. They're open to anyone to attend, but that is who builds CEDS. It's all of you working together to make it something for everyone else to be able to use. All right, back over to you, Emily.
Thanks, Dwayne. And just so you all know, I stuck a link in the chat to the event schedule page on our communities page. So you saw that briefly in that last slide. So if you're interested in seeing what other events are happening, that's the link. So we wanted to spend a few minutes here. We have about 10 minutes left on maybe a little discussion or some interesting things in from you all about how you might be currently using CEDS. So feel free to enter that into the chat. If you have some thoughts about things that you see as benefits, either in from your example, your experience, or that you're currently doing, or in something in the future. And then in what scenarios do you think that CEDS could play a role, whether it's something that is you're directly involved with, or perhaps you're just more broadly, something more broad that you wanted to think about. And we'll give folks just a few minutes here to see if folks are interested and have some thoughts on this. Certainly know that I see some folks who are representing state education agencies anyways that have generate either in some form of implementation